Hey, Judging Freedom fans, never miss an episode of Judge Napolitano's Judging Freedom. Grab the audio version on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast. Get the audio version of Judging Freedom. Subscribe today.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, October 27th, 2023. One of my favorite segments, not just because it's Friday afternoon, but because two of my closest friends and collaborators are here together for our Intelligence Roundtable, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson. Ray and Larry, welcome back, my friends. Double duty this week for both of you. We've been talking, we have a lot to talk about, but I want to start with October 7th. We've been talking a lot about the failures of the Hamas and the IDF to detect and protect what happened on October 7th. Has the Hamas effective dismantling of the Israeli defenses drawn admiration from members of the intelligence community for its effectiveness and its military-like execution? Larry?
I'm not sure. At a minimum, it ought to at least give them a chance to acknowledge that this is not the Hamas that was around in the 2014 Intifada. They're pretty inept, not well coordinated, not able to carry out complicated tasks. They launched a comprehensive military operation across a broad front. And in so doing, they also engaged with some, grotesque terrorism. There's no doubting that. That's where I think they're still sort of their own worst enemy, where they fire off rockets that they don't really know where they're going to land, and then killing some of the civilians that they killed. It just gave more propaganda fodder to the Israelis. And doesn't achieve or anything from a tactical standpoint for Hamas.
Ray, what is your view? Is the intel mentality such that you can admire the swift and successful work of people even when they are barbaric?
Judge, I would say that professional operatives, that is intelligence officers that support kinetic operations and overthrow governments, they support and flatter and praise anybody who's winning. In this case, they would say, yeah, Hamas did this, but their focus would be on the ineptitude on the part of the Netanyahu government. This is a big surprise, so they would draw the right conclusions. What else should we be prepared for in terms of surprises about this earlier thought to be impenetrable, unconquerable Israeli border?
Larry, is the Netanyahu government even remotely interested in diplomacy? I mean, their ambassador at the UN is like a bull in a china shop. He's not going to draw anybody in. They're seem to be overplaying their hand in Hamas, in Gaza, even though supposedly the Biden administration is trying to dial it back. Do they value and have an appreciation for and an interest in standard traditional diplomacy?
No, they're making a real grave error on that front. I understand the Israeli anger, embarrassment, rage over what happened on October 7th. I mean, it was a complete debacle from the standpoint of Israel and a black eye for Bibi Netanyahu. But you go back and look at previous blow-ups in the Middle East, like the Intifada in 2014, Israeli invasion of the southern Lebanon in 2006. And on both of those occasions, they still had lines of dialogue open to Turkey, to Jordan, to China. And what's so different now is in their anger and their emotion, they are lashing out at people, and they've lashed out in such a strong way that they have alienated Jordan, Turkey, China. And you've seen this in recent statements, both at the United Nations Security Council and in other speeches. So Israel is, their ambassador at the UN, I think, is particularly ineffective. He's yelling at people and he's insulting them. And, the art of diplomacy was learning how to give some very uncomfortable truths in a very smooth fashion that when you got done telling somebody that their baby's ugly, they'd tell you thank you. Wow. But that's not what's going on here.
Are the Israelis even talking to Jordan, Turkey, Syria, Iran, anybody in the neighborhood?
No. That's what's so, and the United States is not either. The United States is not brokering any of these kinds of contacts that ought to exist. I mean, as you played yesterday on your show several times, the comments by Erdogan of Turkey, what he's really laying out is a predicate for Turkey intervening militarily on behalf of Hamas. And similarly with the Queen of Jordan, she was very determined in speaking out about the double standard that's being employed, where the West wants the rest of the world to rally around human rights abuses in Ukraine by the Russians, and then stays completely silent with what's going on in the Gaza Strip. So, it's piling up against Israel. It's not diplomatically positive.
Ray, are the Turks getting ready to enter militarily if Israel conducts a full-scale ground invasion of Gaza? And if they did enter, what would they do? Fire missiles at Tel Aviv or enter the ground war themselves?
The Turks are already ready. The question is whether they'll do it. Larry is quite right in pointing out to the ineptitude of the Israeli representative at the UN. As a matter of fact, he so provoked the Chinese representative, very much out of character. The Chinese representative reamed him out yesterday. Now, China is the key to all this. Wang Yi, the foreign minister and actually a member of the Politburo in the Communist Party of China, is in Washington for a couple of days. What is he doing here? He's trying to find out if there's any sense left in Washington in the people who are running our foreign policy. Is he playing the good cop? Well, yeah. The bad cop? The bad cop are Chinese fighters in the South China Sea coming within 10 feet of B-52s. Now, I had to laugh at one of the U.S. reactions. Oh, maybe it was nighttime and maybe he didn't realize how close he was. He knew damn well how close he was.
Right, here's an ABC News report by my friend Terry Moran. Well, we started together at Court TV. It seems like 100 years ago. But anyway, Terry is narrating an ABC News report on the Chinese jets coming very close to a B-52 bomber. In a minute, Larry, what was a B-52 bomber doing there? But this is harrowing what you're about to watch.
In the dead of night over the South China Sea, a Chinese fighter jet came within just 10 feet of an American B-52 bomber. An encounter so dangerous, the Pentagon says that it seems the Chinese pilot was unaware of how close he came to causing a collision.
What should have been a fairly routine intercept got way too close and more dangerous than it needed to be.
Just last week, the Pentagon declassified several videos and photos of what U.S. officials called coercive and risky behavior by Chinese pilots in the last year and a half. U.S. officials warn China is increasingly trying to intimidate U.S. aircraft flying over international waters, while China's defense ministry blames the U.S. for flying over territory it considers its own. The risks of an accidental collision are even greater now, with China rebuffing U.S. attempts to restart a military hotline. The latest incident comes as China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, is in Washington this week, meeting President Biden's top advisors as they try to stabilize U.S.-China relations.
Larry, whether it's international waters or not, how could this possibly happen? What was a B-52 bomber doing there? Is it loaded with that kind of a bomb? And how could it get 10 feet from a Chinese jet without either the American pilot or the Chinese pilot knowing about it?
Yeah, no, they both knew what was going on. The presence of a B-52 there is pure intimidation on the part of the United States. It is a provocative act. It's borderline act of war. We are daring the China. We're going out. We're like a dog marking territory. And the problem with this is these B-52s, they no longer carry, 30, 40 years ago, their mission was they had bombs. They would fly in. They'd drop the bombs. Now they're loaded with basically cruise missiles. They will drop an enormous load of cruise missiles that can then go in and destroy Chinese cities. If the Chinese were flying a bomber like that off the coast of California and Washington and Oregon in international waters, we would be outraged. NORAD would be scrambling around. We would have alerts going off. And it's like our arrogance in this is just appalling because
Ray,
we continue to think we can punch people.
How could this happen? Would the president himself have to have ordered this? Would he even know about it? Does this come from the Secretary of Defense? Surely the pilot on his own can't decide to do this. It's so provocative and dangerous.
Judge, the bottom line here, the more interesting aspect is how the Chinese did this. B-52s and warships are pretty much off the South China Sea coast a lot of times, okay? This time the Chinese came within 10 feet, okay? Now, if Chinese bombers were near Hawaii or San Francisco, I agree with Larry that they would be harassed, but I don't think they would come within 10 feet, even if it was nighttime, okay? Why? Because that would mean war. Now, the Chinese, do they want war? No, but they want to have a really hard-nosed attitude toward this stuff. And to me, their willingness to risk the kind of incident that might lead to war is the story here. Coming that close is really noxious, okay?
Okay, but Chinese... Larry, you're blaming this on the Americans as being utterly provocative and totally reckless. Don't let me put words in your mouth. If you agree with those words, correct. Who could have ordered this? Tony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan? Somebody in the upper echelons of the American government must have decided, let's pinprick the Chinese and see how they react. And if so, why? Yeah,
this was signed off on at a minimum by Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, and Charles Johnson, the new replacement of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It probably did not get to the White House, but they were at least apprised of it. But this was, these kinds of provocative steps are designed to flex U.S. muscle, and all this is occurring against the backdrop that the Chinese now have ships that are entering the Persian Gulf that are in that entire area around Israel that are capable of firing cruise missiles that our U.S. ships can't defeat. So, I mean, this thing's on a hair trigger. We are pushing and pushing and pushing to the edge, and you shouldn't look at this in just one isolated area of what's in the South China Sea as opposed to what's going off in the Mediterranean. It's all connected.
Okay, Ray, before we get back to the Mediterranean and even the Red Sea and even the Persian Gulf, what do you think President Xi is saying to his cabinet when he gets a report like the one we just saw from ABC News?
Well, he's saying our dual approach is the only thing we have left. We have to show our tiger teeth, and we have to show our best diplomacy in the person of Wang Yi, who is now in Washington. The prospect of a two-front war with Russia and China joined at the hip is something that has been percolating for 2 full years now. Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, said, we got enough money for that. What the Chinese are trying to say is, look, don't mistake us. We're going to defend what we consider to be our regional interests, just as the Russians are doing in Ukraine. Now, what Wang Yi wants to find out, in my view, is Biden compos mentis? He may be Biden tomorrow or the next day. This is very serious stuff, Okay, so now what's he going to tell Biden? He's going to say, "Look, these advisors you have that said you can drive a wedge between Russia and China, forget about it. Okay, we're in this thing together, and we're in this thing together with respect to the Middle East." Now, Mr. Blinken here, whom I admire greatly, young Wang Yi would say, it doesn't really get it, because on Sunday he said we can't have a ceasefire, and on Tuesday he said, well, maybe we'll have a ceasefire. Mr. President, you better have a ceasefire. You're going to be totally isolated, okay? And besides that, Mr. President, she's not going to come to California next month unless you wise up.
Wow.
There'll be no summit.
Wow.
Great
analysis. Larry, how is China if at all, exploiting the Israeli-Hamas conflict?
I don't think they're so much exploiting it as that they have been actually working with Russia to see if they can try to construct an off-ramp that will prevent this thing from blowing up.
Didn't the Chinese foreign minister say either this morning or yesterday, I don't know which day it was because I don't know what time zone he was in, that the Palestinians have the right to their own homeland?
Yeah,
Two-state
no,
solution.
absolutely. And note that up to this point, China has been Israel's largest trading partner in Asia. And so China and Israel have actually had good relations up to this point, which, as Ray noted earlier in our conversation, what happened yesterday at the United Nations when the Chinese UN representative laid into the Israeli ambassador in a way that's so uncharacteristic of the Chinese, very direct, very pointed. The Chinese are known for being much more subtle and not confrontational like that. So what you're seeing right now is, I think China recognizes fully that the prospects for war with the West is high, because they keep hearing from us, China's our enemy. China's our enemy. And you know how America reacts when we say that Iran's chanting death to America? Well, calling China our enemy is the same as us chanting death to China. Let's be frank about that. And we keep doing it, and without any kind of self-awareness.
Ray, why are American jets hitting targets in Syria?
Those targets are American forces that have been uninvited, or actually, with respect to Iraq, disinvited, but the U.S. said, no, we would prefer to stay anyway. Let us keep 2,000-3,000 here.
Wait a minute. Isn't that when the army of a foreign country comes into another country against the will of that government, isn't that known as an invasion?
Yeah.
Well, it is, and that's what it was in 2003. Now it's just a occupation of a part of that land. In Syria, there's no invitation. There was no invasion. Thanks be to God. Larry helped, and we helped, veteran intelligence professionals for Saturday. We raised the specter that this pretext for an attack on Syria, namely the sarin gas incident outside of Damascus, was a false flag attack. Right. We were able to make that. Larry, Pat Lang, our former assistant, had contacts with General Dempsey, who had his head screwed on, right? And he said to the president, look, that was a false flag. And I've checked that out with my British counterpart. He confirms that. And so Obama said, hey, I don't have to start a war on my own volition. That was big. Now, will the neocons get their war on Syria now? Oh, that's an open question. That's what they've always wanted. They have forces in there. If those 900 troops in the north, or the ones around Tanif, if they're attacked, well, those neocons will say, well, Mr. Austin, Secretary Austin, we can't look weak here. We got to attack Syria and remove Bashar al-Assad. For whose benefit? Hello, Israel's benefit. That's the only reason we have any policy towards Syria.
All right, so Larry, we have the Netanyahu government radically overplaying its hand and threatening to invade Gaza, declining to participate in any meaningful diplomacy. The Americans taunting the Chinese either in international or Chinese waters. Whatever happened to Ukraine, Larry?
How do you spell that? Yeah,
Nicely put, my man.
I
Seriously,
put
what is the status of the war in Ukraine? We haven't seen President Zelensky since October 6th.
Now, there was a Scottish group in the 1980s. They put out a song, "Don't You Forget About Me." That's Zelensky's playing that over and over and over. And what we're seeing is Ukraine is just getting ground into dust. Russia is accelerating its offensive operations. The weather clearly is turned against the Ukrainians. They do not have the manpower. In fact, they're looking at woman power now. They're trying to dragoon women to go fill front ranks because they don't have enough men. It's just, and Congress, the current Republican-led Congress with the new Speaker Mike Johnson, no relation, he's made it quite clear. If anybody's going to get $60 billion, it's not going to be Ukraine. It's going to be Israel.
Right.
So Ukraine might get the 14 billion maybe, but it's just Ukraine is no longer a priority. And in any way, they're losers. We don't like losers.
Last word, Ray, 14 billion. Talk about throwing good money after bad.
For Ukraine, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, that will happen simply to try to prevent the ultimate clear loss of the Ukrainian troops. Now, whether that will work, I don't think it will. In other words, I think the Russians will go to the Dnieper as soon as the ground freezes, and that's probably a month from now. Then they'll say, now, are you ready to deal? And then Biden will have to face up to the fact that he was wrong in saying Russia has lost. Actually, it was Russia has won now. What do we do? What do we do with a prospective loss when the election's coming up? So all bets are off what he'll do. They have a personal stake in there. If that redheaded guy wins, they could all end up in jail because the evidence is there, okay? So it's very volatile. It's very dog wagging tail or vice versa. And the Middle East is at best a diversion from this because this is going to come down, and it's going to come down within the next month or so. We'll have to see how Biden and the rest of them react. Meanwhile, the Chinese guy, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, is trying to tell Biden, look, come to your senses. This guy, Blake, is a really nice fellow, but he doesn't know from nothing, okay? And, if you think you can finance a two-front war, well, I don't think you can win a two-front war. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, with all due respect, you're not winning that one-front war in Ukraine.
Gentlemen, truly one of the best conversations we've had. To me, it went by like that, and I can tell from the comments how deeply appreciated it is. Have a great weekend, guys. Thank you for your time. We look forward to next week already.
Thank you,
Thanks, Judge.
Of course. Great conversation. Coming up at 3:30, Ask the Judge, AMA, Ask Me anything about what we talk about on the air. And at 4 o'clock, he's been traveling all over the world, and I think now is coming to us back from his home or his office in Chicago, the great Professor John Mearsheimer. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.